Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 62 of Teaching Tales, the podcast completely devoted to sharing stories from the world of education. I am your host, Brent Coley, elementary principal in beautiful Southern California. And joining me today from Northern California, or Central California, I believe. Northern California, there we go. Northern California, the one, the only, Brandon Blom. Brandon, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Great. Did I say your last name correctly?
Yes, sir. Blom, you got it.
As someone whose last name is mispronounced all the time, I want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah.
So, well, awesome. Well, Brandon, we met. I appreciate you taking the time to join me. We met at the Spring Q Conference, about 2-3 weeks ago, and had a great conversation that I was like, oh my gosh, please come on my podcast. And so we can continue this conversation because, well, I'll tease it a little bit, leave it there. Before we get to what we talked about, for anyone who is not familiar with you and your work, who is Brandon? What does Brandon do?
So my current role is Director of Educational Technology for Roseville City School District, or right outside Sacramento. And even though that's my title, most people think Director of Ed Tech, the green screen, the fun stuff, which absolutely that's part of my job. But I'm also in charge of grading for the district. And so that's my current role, and we'll talk more about that. And then before that, I was a middle school teacher, taught 7th and 8th grade math, and then a elementary principal, and now in my current role. So, enjoyed being at the middle school, elementary, and now at the district office.
Awesome. He's done a little bit of everything. And yeah, you talked about grading. And when we were at the Q conference, you were saying how over the last couple of years, you have taken your district on the journey towards standards-based grading at the middle school level, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Correct. And I know that my district currently, I'm at the elementary level, and we use standards-based grades. So our report cards are standards-based. We don't have any letter grades anymore. Those have been gone for a few years. But in my district at the middle and high school level, grades are alive and well. Well, alive, maybe not well, so to speak. But I'm so curious because you had said that you've taken this journey and you're, if not there, you are close to being there. And it's been a successful trek toward standards-based grading. So kind of, if you would, because I'm sure anyone listening right now who is not there or would like to be there would really benefit from what you can share. So the virtual mic is yours.
Absolutely. So, anyone who has attempted to take on grading, anything, so homework grading, it becomes passionate. People, and rightfully so, like, hey, I've done this for 30 years. I went through the system, right? Like, I know what grading's about. And so, yeah, it's been a journey. And anyone who's going to go down that path, I think it's that whole line of, educate people, do a lot of, professional development, chunk it out, because if you try to do too much too fast, and, we've had a committee, we've done all this work, and I'll go into detail what I mean when I say the work. But it started in August 2017, and the final full rollout, there'll always be work to do, right? But as far as like students and changing the system with the changes in place, August 2019. And that's 2 full years of committee meetings, board meetings, presenting to staff. It's been a full 2 years. And, hey, I'm sure some people might be listening saying we could do it in a year. Some people say that's too fast and take longer. But for our district, it's been a 2-year journey. And so, there's so much around grading, because what happens is as soon as you start peeling back, like, oh, we just want to talk about, maybe a 100-point scale doesn't make sense. Well, you start peeling that, and then you're like, well, then what kind of calculation are you going to use if you're not, and it just keeps going. And that's why it takes so long. And I think that's why a lot of people know a lot of times like what they're doing around grading isn't right. But to take that challenge on, it takes a lot of people. It takes all our principals being on board. It took our teachers on the committee. I have a superintendent who is not afraid, like, hey, there might be some community members that don't the changes at first. And I've just been really lucky that it's truly everyone, superintendent, assistant superintendent, the principals, teachers. It takes a lot of people to move an entire system away from something that been ingrained forever.
Absolutely. No, I think that's such a great point for anybody that just the recognition. Um, it's a sacred cow for I mean, this is something that to put this on the in the spotlight as something, hey, what you're doing may not be the best way. Even I think you said it perfectly. Even when we realize that, it doesn't mean it's easy to move away from that. So it's almost like, I know I'm not eating healthy.
Yeah.
I know I'm not exercising like I should, but it's easier to make that recognition, to come to admitting that, than it is to actually getting on the treadmill every day and eating it more healthily and stuff like that. Maybe that's an oversimplification. It's probably an oversimplification, because I think it's probably easier to start, for at least for me, to start eating healthy than the whole system.
But your point remains. I mean, it's true that the first step is recognizing, and that takes a lot. I mean, that's why the first while was just us even explaining why we're even taking this on, right? Like, why are we talking about that? Because, right, that to your analogy of, oh, I need to eat healthier. Like, first it's that acknowledgement, like, wait, maybe this grading system isn't equitable. Maybe what we're doing doesn't actually help us build relationships with students. Maybe we're not communicating clearly, right? Like, as we start building those questions, I mean, that takes time, because anytime you challenge someone's belief of, I know what I'm doing, and you start saying, like, well, here's this other way. Even our great teachers, it takes a minute, right? It takes a little bit of processing time to be like, oh, remember that point you made? Yeah, I kind of see that now. So,
yeah.
And then, like I said, we'll talk through some of the specific things we're doing. I mean, my thing is, though, to do all of it takes 2 years, but there are things that some of our teachers right away, when we start talking about it, they're like, I can do this right now. Like, this is something that immediately I can make a change around grading.
Yeah. Well, I know, like, you'd mentioned homework. Yeah. And I went to your session on homework at Q, and I have at my site taken on that topic. But to your point, I did it 2 years ago, where introduced it just kind of like, because again, at the elementary level, as you know, and you presented, there's no research to back up the positive impacts of homework at the elementary level. I mean, homework does not make kids learn more. I mean, there's no research that suggests that. That being said, if I stand up in a staff meeting and say, stop giving homework because here's an article, and hold it up and say, because it says it's a bad thing, you and I both know how that would have gone over. Yeah. So rather, it was like, hey, so completely slow process. Here's an article. Read this. Take a little time, 10 minutes. Talk at your tables. What do you think? And really just have them reflect on, why are we doing what we're doing? And if we can't answer that question, or if the answer is because it's what we've always done, that's not a good enough answer. So it's literally been 2 years. Do we have it where I think I'd like to, like, where everybody is on the same page? No, not yet. However, we've seen a lot of progress in terms of people modifying their homework practice, moving away from just the traditional, well, I have to give homework because that's what teachers do, right? type thing. When it's like, no, not necessarily. That's not what you have to do. So.
And that's why in my session, so, we always talk about why, so anything, whether it's grades, homework, or I'll talk about reading as well, like, why do we give homework? And that's how I start my session, and you got to see it. And, like you said, if the answer is just because we've always done it, well, that's never going to be good enough for me, right? Like, and so what happens is, going to your point, bringing my staff on board, same thing. Like, even if I thought homework for kinder through third grade was crazy, or all homework, I mean, whatever, that instead, let's come to some collective commitments, because it was amazing to me that people that had different views, our staff, we had read the book Whisperer, we had read some articles on homework, and they're like, well, reading is right. We wanted to get it as a school site where reading isn't homework. Reading is just what we do. Exactly. Research will back. So then it was great, because even people who maybe had different views on homework, so that was our process at my elementary school and as principals. What can we commit to? Well, no matter where people stood, it was, we want to put reading first. Well, then let's tell parents that. So we made it clear, like, we actually, email parents that if you have to choose, because I'm a parent, I know you are as well. Yeah. Here's the reality. Like, we get home from sports, softball, 8 o'clock at night, eat dinner, get the kids showered, all that stuff. All of a sudden it's late. And most time in my household before we went down this journey was, okay, I have to do this worksheet, which I might get punished for, or read where the worksheet doesn't actually help me academically. Most kids are going to do the worksheet because I don't want to sit out recess, or I don't want to miss out on Fun Friday or other stuff, where that's the exact opposite thing we should be doing with our young kids. So, that's where, like you said, instead of just like going in, this is now the policy, educate, see what you can come to an agreement around. Because it's amazing how many times, like after some education and giving it some time, like you said, people will realize like, oh, we can come to some agreements here.
Yeah. And just, coming, if we come together as a team and we reflect on that, and if people don't like to be dragged along, even if the destination is a potentially good one, dragging somebody along doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So as you started tackling the concept of grading, you started small. So how did it start? I mean, you mentioned committees and stuff like that.
Good question. I mean, so really it was, here's a crazy thing. Well, not crazy, but like the board policy was already set around, it didn't specifically call it standard-based grading, but what it did call out was that a child's academic grade should be their academic grade. Now, at the face of it, when you talk to teachers, it's like, well, yeah, that's like, duh, of course, right? Like a kid's math grade should be a math grade. But what happens in traditional school, and you know this is, well, I always use this as an example. So this is one of the 82%. What's an 82% mean? Well, first off, just 82, people are going to give different definitions. Well, that's at grade level. That's at standard. That's okay. Like all these different words where I'm like, we can't even define what that means. But then even asking teachers, like teachers will say, well, it depends. In traditional grading where I'm mixing in homework and classroom discussion and all this stuff and hard work. Well, that 82 might be a kid that doesn't know the subject area, but they work really hard, right? Because I inflate it with some points. Or it could be a kid who they know every single thing when it comes to math around the standards, but they don't always turn in their homework. So they're minus that 18%, right? So what we got to in our district, the first step was just separating. Here's their academic grade. And then we separated what's called learning behaviors. So work completion, engagement in class, those are super important. In fact, they're so important that we're going to call them out on the report card. That way it's not a mix. So when a kid has a grade in math or science, that is how they're doing academically. Now, the kid that doesn't turn anything in, we need to talk about that. But if mathematically they know all the standards, they should be getting the top score because the academic grade should represent how they are doing academically. Yeah. And same thing for what we have found though is, you think about is we also have kids, and unfortunately that is, we have kids that come to our district brand new to the country and they are working so hard in class. They're turning everything in that they can. They're super engaged, but their academic level is not where it needs to be at. Well, we don't want to lie to them either. Academically, here's where you're at. But your learning behaviors, I'm so proud of you because look at your engagement and your work completion. Yeah. And so that was our first step, was just separating learning behaviors from academics. And then we also defined formative and summative because I don't know if you've ever seen the Allen Iverson clip around practice. Like, what are we talking about? Practice, right? Yeah. And so we played that clip for our teachers, and it's a great reminder that practice is super important. But here's my question to teachers. Practice is super important. If it's for practice, though, why are we grading it? Like, we don't grade practice. We get feedback on practice. We get better. So, last year, and this is crazy, it took a year to do this, but it takes time to plant seeds, go over the why, was, hey, separate learning behaviors and academic grades, and then just define formative and summative. Formative is super important. We need kids to practice and get feedback, but until they get feedback on something, it doesn't count as a grade against them because we want kids to improve over time. Yeah. We celebrate, or one of the big things in education now is celebrating failure, encouraging risk, all that kind of stuff. How do we do that if we're punishing? if they're learning to do something and you're grading it and marking them down, and especially at the middle and the high school level, that's when the points, at least in my district, the points are so crucial. My daughter's a high school senior. My son is an 8th grader in middle school. So this is a real life topic right now. Absolutely. And so, that's where, when it comes to practice, I mean, that whole idea I think about, and I know you present as well. Like when I do a presentation, when I first build my presentation, if I had to turn that in and I got graded on it, and let's say you gave me a 40%, and then by the end, because I work and feedback, I get 100%, but you average that and you're like, C minus. Is that really fair, right? Like, no, in the end, it was more important for me to get feedback. And or maybe that's just me, but when I like build a presentation, the first time I run through it in my mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to get better at this before I go present it to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way, where that's why, yeah, the iterations, I don't want to be judged on my first, I don't want to be judged on my first one.
But you do want feedback.
I do want, exactly. I want feedback, but yeah, that's a great example of the presentations that's why we practice.
Absolutely. And so that was, yes, that was like the first year. And then this year, what we've been looking at is, basically everything from, we're getting rid of the 100-point scale, because I'm a math teacher. 1% doesn't make a difference. Well, it's crazy to me. I mean, I taught however many kids. When a kid had an 80, I never had a kid come to my class and be like, Mr. Blom, I got to get an 81. What do I got to do to get an 81, right? But when a kid had a 79, how many times is that kid in your classroom? And so it's weird to me that mathematically it's still 1%, but it makes such a difference that kids are willing to fight for. So we're going to 4 levels. I mean, that's a lot, pretty traditional for standards-based grading. I mean, we looked at everything, 3, 4, 6. Our IB school is that's IB, but so we went beginnings of the beginning level, approaching, proficient, mastery. What's a little different about ours than a lot of standards-based grading is we just separate it into 2 things. It's either standard not met, that's the first 2 levels, or standard met, the last 2 levels. So that mastery isn't this unattainable magic thing of like, it's just what we said is there more precision, more originality, more creativity, more consistency, all within the standard. So our top level, that's the one thing that gets a little, I've seen some districts get in trouble, is they can't define what the highest level is. And in ours, we're telling teachers, like, define what mastery looks like.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, what a great point about the 1%. 1% means nothing if you're 83. I mean, it's like, I got the B. Yeah. I mean, but or 69. I mean, 69 or 59. Oh my gosh. How many boxes of tissues can I bring in to raise?
And it's funny you say that example, because we use that a lot with our teachers, where when we are trying to say how kids are doing academically, well, even the new system, if the kids at approaching, they're not where they need to be. There's no more bringing in brownies, boxes of Kleenex. Like, we're just reporting how they're doing academically. So this whole bar grain system, like, that's nice. They brought you some tissue, but I'm not changing how they're doing academically, because that did not improve their learning. And so the one other thing, I know this is getting long, but the other big shift we're making is that there's no more overall grade, which that scares some people. Meaning, like, for language arts, so there's no more language arts grade. You get scored in the domains. And for my own children, it's been amazing to see. Like, I'll use my own daughter as an example. If she had just a combined score, she'd have the highest score. Because reading for literature, great. Writing, fantastic. Reading for informational text, a little bit more of a struggle, and something that she needs to focus on. But what we know in our system is once there's an overall, kids don't look at those other areas.
Yep.
So we talk to teachers, like, if we value those other things, we're not a high school, we don't have to report GPA. If we know what it helps learning to separate and give kids more specific feedback, then we need to do that.
Yeah. Great point. That, I mean, even as adults, if we look back to our college time, when you got a paper back or a test back or something like that, let's say it was a multiple choice test and you had an 89 or a 91 or 92. Oh, sweet, got my A. Moving on. Yeah. Rather, I mean, not to say that we would never look, but how often do students look at that final grade and fail to look back, even if the teacher provided the feedback? Well, especially writing, it's like when you put a letter grade or something like that on a writing assignment, it kind of overrides oftentimes any feedback that was that the teacher took a bunch of time to put on that paper. And
we've talked about that, especially with our, it usually comes up a lot of times around this essays, and with our language arts teachers, like, I hate telling them, but like, we show them the research. Like, that's actually research based, that as far as improving learning, once you put a grade, like, you could put the most detailed comments, but kids won't look at it. And so we've talked about delaying the grade. And what's funny is some teachers at first, like, no, they look at it. And then other teachers are like, no, I know my own child. Like, when my child comes home with a paper, if there's a grade on it, they don't look at it. And so an educator up here in Sacramento, he always says that he doesn't put a grade on anything he gives feedback on, and he doesn't give feedback on anything he gives a grade on. And I think that's a good lens to look through.
Yeah. Because if feedback is the most important thing, and really, whether you're playing soccer or learning how to do math or reading for information, that's how we get better. If it's just a right, wrong, but no feedback on, well, what did I do wrong? Where are we? So right now in the process, you are, is your report card complete? So your report card's completely revamped, or it will be next year?
Yeah. So the change we made this year, the report card right now does have learning behavior separated, and then the formative, summative in the grade book. Like a teacher can report formative if they want to, but what happens is, and this is again very technical, but in the grade book, if I tag something formative, parents can see it, kids can see it, but it doesn't count toward the overall academic grade. It's not until I tag something as summative. So that was the work this year. And then starting next year, yeah, I mean, there's no more overall. We're doing the 4 levels. So mastery will be the top level. If a kid doesn't turn something in, there's no more zeros. It's just called insufficient evidence. And because that's a big problem with the 100-point scale. And I'm sure you've seen those charts a million times where if a kid gets a 0 and they get 90s on everything else, they're done, right? Like, I mean, it's, so, taking care of that. And then the default calculation, the one thing is when you have words like beginning, approaching, proficient, mastery, you can have numbers on the back end, but we just went with mode as the default calculation. And we've really worked with teachers, though, that reminding teachers, you are the one. Like, if you have the evidence looking at recency and consistency of where a kid is, like, use that. You can override the grade book. Like, we have, and it's not just our district. I mean, I've talked to tons of teachers but the grade book says, well, no, the grade book doesn't say, right? That's just a calculation. And so we still have to, in our grade book, put a default, and ours is mode. So whatever the kid has achieved the most consistently. So anyway, that's that. Yeah. So that will all, August 2019, that will all be taking place.
That's awesome. How has the topic come up with retakes? Again, going back to the formative versus summative, how have teachers been receptive to that concept? Because I know that a lot of times the old school thinking is, nope, that they did it once, or going back to your, nope, you got a 0, that's it, missed the deadline, he's done, or she's done. How is that come up?
It's a great question. And, so more than even just, I need to retake that test, as we look at just standards in general. So like, we're really working with our teachers. We've done a lot of training this year around building rubrics. And so what we said is, like, let's use reading for informational text as an example. Well, if I look at that rubric and that kid happened to miss the test, but then on the next one, they can show me they can do it. Honestly, like, do I need, and I feel confident, right? Not just one, but they've now shown multiple times. Like, do I even need that test again? So that's one thing on retakes. The other thing that's been interesting with us breaking it down and not worrying about the overall so much is, while it's not officially till next year, we have a lot of teachers that have just jumped in, and it's awesome. And they'll show me, like, this, what I'm doing is they realize, like, I just had a math teacher, I met with him last week, and he's like, look, before this would have been 1 score, but now because I'm breaking it down, these are 3 scores. This kid doesn't need to retake the whole test, which I would have given him before. Yeah. They've done fine on these 2 sections. But when it comes to, I think it was solving expressions, like, this is where they're struggling. I'm like, awesome. Like, if you want to retake, now I don't have to retake the whole test. Yeah. That's what I'm working on. So I also always, being a realist with teachers, no, there is a limit. Like, while I love standards-based grading, like, they'll retest a million times, but what we're trying to get them to see is, do they really need to take the whole test? Are you going to be assessing it again anyway, right? Like, that might not necessarily be give that exact test again, because I'm going to be reassessing that standard coming up.
Yeah. No, I love that concept of that's the beauty of the stand. When you break it down, is he's got these 2 sections. It's this part that he's or she's struggling on. So just redo that. And how, as a student, I can only imagine how students what's the feedback been from students in your district?
Yeah, and so once again, the teachers, it's been fun. One of my favorite things is I've got to just ask students some of these questions when we've talked about grading and hearing their answers. And what's great is, it is a shift, because let's use that example where the teacher broke it down to 3 pieces. One student was like, well, before I would have just been a 92% and I would have been fine, but now I have something I need to focus on. But then, as we get more used to it, they're like, but then at the same time, I probably need to work on it anyway. Right? Because before, like you said, 92, hey, I'm good. But it's been really fun. I'd say more than grades or any of that, what's been cool is from teachers and students is, as they build rubrics, is the conversations that teachers have got to have with students, because they can self-assess. Like, they can look at a rubric and be like, I don't know how to do this thing yet. Can you help me get there? Or teachers, instead of teachers saying, this is your grade, like, you tell me, where do you think you fall right now? Yeah. So it's been really cool to hear teachers and students getting students more involved in the assessment process, rather than the teacher being the one that dictates, like, this is your grade.
Yeah. Well, as we've been having this conversation, I mean, for me, every episode, it's like, okay, what's the moral of the story? What it needs to be about learning and not the grade. And using the personal example of I think the traditional makeup of middle, especially high school, I think it's a broken system. The college system is broken, and you hear so often, oh, well, high schools, we have to prepare them for college. So they do it terribly up in college, like the lecture. Well, they got to get used to listening to a lecture for 2 hours. So it's like the food tastes terrible up there. So we got to get them used to the taste now. But I recall having a conversation with my daughter. She's a senior now. It was last year, having a conversation. And when I would ask, hey, how was your day, baby? How'd your day go today? And virtually every time, the quality of her day in her response to me was dependent on a grade that she got in a class or on an assignment or something like that. Like, hey, how was your day? And she'd be like, oh, great, I got a 95 on my government test, or I got and it was always like that. And I remember one day just saying to her, I just kind of chuckled, and I said, chuckling yet serious, I said, are you learning anything? And she looked at me kind of surprised by the question and smiled and said, of course, Dad. And she proceeded to tell me all of the things that she is learning. And she goes to a great school with good teachers. But I think that's the byproduct of a broken system that is so focused on grades. Whereas I remember when she went into high school, the favorite app on her phone, like second to texting, was the gradebook app. And that's not right. I mean, it was so much about how many points do I have, or how many more do I need to get to this grade, rather than focused on what am I learning? And I think for anyone listening, I mean, that's what I'm taking away from this is wherever we are in our journey toward revamping, whether it's homework practices or grading practices, and if you're just a third grade, if you are a third grade teacher, a kindergarten teacher, a high school principal, a director of technology like you are, how can we make it more about learning and less about points? And I think that's what you've done, or that's what you've been striving to do, right?
And I appreciate it, because I've done so many presentations, worked so hard with the staff, and trying to summarize for like the school board, for example, like what is really the point of all this? And so I would say there's so many things, and I can obviously talk about forever, but the two things is, one, we're trying to be better about communication. So when you see a kid's academic grade, that's their academic grade, like I said. And while that seems simple, like you said, that's not always the case when it comes to grading, right?
Yeah.
But then second is, it's about improving learning. That's why we're doing all this. That's why we exist, right? That's why schools exist. I always tell teachers, we have three goals. We need to keep kids safe, right, first. Two, we need to increase their learning, and we also need to increase their skill, but then increase their will. I want kids to want to learn. And the other thing about grading, it's amazing how many times grading gets in the way of a kid enjoying a subject or wanting to learn more about something because, oh, that's not going to be on the test, or rather than just, like I love science, like let me learn more. And, as far as, I'll give you just a quick story. And anytime I give a story about grading, I got to be a little careful because, if any teachers, get back to them, because I think a lot of teachers, they just haven't had a chance to think about it, right? They think they're improving learning. And when I give extra points and I'm doing this, well, I've had this conversation with teachers all the time. Like I give them extra points because otherwise they won't do it, which doesn't help their learning. And my take on that is always, you're maybe helping them for that minute, but are you building them into a lifelong learner, right? But the example I like to give is my nephew in high school. He had this project, and I appreciate the teacher thinking about outside the box. Like, hey, I want them to learn, it's a science class and about a mole, and it's a calculation that they use for science. So she has them buy the materials to build a mole at home, and then they have to make like a wrap or something, which sounds all great, right? Be creative. I'm all about including the 4 C's. However, let's just think about this for a minute. This is worth points. This is affecting a kid's grade that will potentially impact them going to college.
Yeah.
They're buying materials at home. Well, my brother-in-law, sister-in-law can afford materials.
Equity.
There's a lot of kids that can't. So one, can't afford the materials. Two, my nephew's super lucky. He has a mom, a grandma that will help him learn to sew. What about the kid that doesn't have that support at home? So, and now you go in, hey, my nephew can bring this thing in. He can get extra points. His grades now increase by however many %. But the kid that might actually know the equation, how to apply the equation, actually knows science so much more, his chance of getting to college is lower. And that's not fair. Yeah, it's a total equity thing. And those are just the things that stick with me, that we're trying to make a change where it's about equity, doing what's right for all kids. And so, I know a lot of people, like I said, I don't want to ever hammer a teacher, but we just do need to look at what we have always done, and does it make sense?
No, I agree. And yeah, anything that we're sharing, it's not an indictment on any particular teacher or anything like that. I think it's more of a statement about just kind of the system in general.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've talked about with my staff, like with the homework, and you mentioned projects, that's one of the next things that we're going to be tackling. It's just, for me, it's reflection. If, like, when I talked about homework, I stood at the front raising my hand saying, ladies and gentlemen, I would have been leading the parade as somebody who gave bad homework sometimes. And why? Because nobody ever asked me to ask myself, why are you doing this, Brent?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of the same thing. If we can ask ourselves, if our teachers can ask themselves, is the way I'm doing this the best way for student learning? Is the way I'm doing this the most equitable practice? Is it going to benefit your nephew or his classmate who is not in the same position and can't go to Michael's and buy all of those supplies and doesn't have the family support to complete that project, but like you said, maybe knows the material better? And again, yeah, that's the problem with the high schools and the college and the GPAs and you're talking about high stakes.
Yeah, and we're lucky. I mean, if you teach or principal of a elementary, middle school, and I get the pressure. I mean, you saw when I present, I always talk about. I mean, I always try to name the fear, and the fear is that, well, we need to prepare them for high school. We need to prepare them for college, right? I mean, that's always the thing that seems to come up. And I always argue, or shouldn't say argue, like to discuss that. As an elementary principal, if I had taken away recess because I was preparing them for middle school, that would have sounded ridiculous. Like, we take care of the kids at the age they have, or the age we have them at. And then same thing with, I love giving the example for my high school teachers. Like, well, I'm preparing them for college, and I'm like, yeah, but in college they're going to go to class 15 hours a week. Are you cool with that? Like, can they come to high school 15 hours a week? And they're like, no way. I'm like, well, we do what's right for our kids when we have them. They'll learn to play whatever game is next. But the big thing is take care of the kids for what they need at the age that you have them.
Amen. No, well, gosh, this is, Brandon, thank you. This is hopefully anybody listening, as I say frequently, even if nobody else listens, I got something out of this, and it's something that I can use. I really like that, separating the academic grade from the learning behaviors, because that is probably one of the biggest arguments for keeping things status quo is, well, they need to learn to be responsible and stuff like that. And you're not saying don't report on that. It's just, it should be separate.
We're actually saying it's so important that we're going to call it out separately. And that was a mind shift, because they're like, you don't even value it because it's not their academic grade. And we'll see this is new next year. We'll see how it is. Our actual, like, for middle schools, the extracurricular eligibility, so sports or clubs, before, we have to have a policy for our league or whatever that it used to be based on academic grade. We're actually switching that to the learning behavior. So, like, is a kid working in class? Like, are they doing, because that, let's use the example, and I think of a very specific student where they're new to the country, their academic grade, they will never be eligible to play sports right now, right? I mean, they don't know English, but they're working so hard in class. Shouldn't we be basing it off of that instead? And so, so my point being, like, we find it so valuable, we're still calling it out over here, but their academic grade is just how they're doing academically.
I love that. Gosh, and what a perfect example of somebody new to the country learning the language whose work ethic is off the charts. To penalize that student, to not let them be eligible for something would be a shame. So, well, Brandon, before I let you go, for anyone who wants to connect with you online, how could they do that?
Yeah, just everything is just Brandon K. Blom. So Twitter, websites, brandonkblom.com, email, brandonkblom@gmail. So pretty simple, just Brandon K. Blom. And I love I appreciate you having me on, and it was great chatting with you at Q. I did read your book, and I appreciate it. I'm not just saying I get on here. It just, everything that you believe in as far as, the relationships and knowing students' names. Like, as a principal, when any principal asks me advice, I'm like, get to know kids' names. It's amazing. So just want to appreciate the time and all you're doing. And, but going back to the connecting, and this is, same thing, like, if anyone ever has questions, same thing on Boxer, like, just reach out. Like, I love talking about this and helping people or if you hear something, you're like, hey, I disagree with that. I'm open for discussion at all times. I love talking education, because it really is about improving all students' learning, and that's what we're about.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, I totally agree. And yeah, the discussion, the reflection is usually where the growth comes from. So, well, awesome. Brandon, thanks for taking the time. And listeners, thank you for taking the time to listen. Hopefully you got something out of this. And if you have not already done so, subscribe to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Google Play, in Spotify, or you can listen directly on the website at brentcoley.com on the podcast page. And as Brandon mentioned, I do have a book called Stories of Edu Influence. If you like stories with a message, I encourage you to pick up a copy, because it's something it's 23 years of stories from my experience as a classroom teacher and a site administrator that will remind you and encourage you that you make a difference even on the days when you do not feel like it. And that is available on Amazon. So once again, Brandon, thank you, my friend. I hope to connect with you again at a future conference in person.
I appreciate it. It's great connecting and talking.
Awesome. And to everyone listening, thank you so much. And until next time, have a good one.